and everybody on the panel.
Well, I just want to say a huge thank you to Bev and Mark and the amazing team at Music Venues Trust. But I also want to say a big thank you to everybody in this room. We all know how hard we work. We know that our contracts say 35 hours a week on them, and we know that's not what we do. So I just want to recognise that we've made a huge amount of progress over the last 10 years, but we still find ourselves in a moment of crisis, I think. So we need to keep fighting the good fight. I'm going to introduce us to our panel. We're going to talk about, well, actually, we're going to probably take apart the topic for this. What does realistic programming mean? Realistic programming in a challenging era. I'm going to pass to the panel to introduce themselves.
Hello, my name's Harkirit. I'm mostly based in York. I work a lot at the venue called The Crescent, but I also promote under Ouroboros, and basically what we're quite interested in is bringing a lot of left field music to York, a lot of global stuff, jazz, Afrobeat, psych, disco, techno. Just really was interested in bringing things, musicians, acts to York who weren't really playing the city beforehand, and trying to get more diversity on stage that kind of better reflected the changing nature of York as a city, really.
Hi, my name's Scott. I run the bar and events at Elysium Gallery and Venue in Swansea. It sort of started as an art gallery and studio space, but they acquired a premises which had a bar, and then they started putting events on, and I came on and sort of started filling out the event schedule. We mostly work with sort of local young up-and-coming acts, and then probably similar targets as well, like sort of more left field stuff, like jazz, world music. Trying to bring a bit of that into the city as well, and trying to make ends meet as much as possible.
Hi, my name's Katie from Front Room Songs. I started Front Room Songs putting gigs on in my living room because there were no venues in the town that I live. That was 12 years ago. I still do them from time to time. I now programme London's largest outdoor free festival on the South Bank at London Bridge City, and also a stage at Wilderness Festival, and from time to time work with putting on shows myself, and also working with other London promoters as well, putting on music in grassroots venues.
My name's Milo. I'm the in-house promoter at Bootleg Social in Blackpool, which is a 330 cap town centre venue underneath an Italian restaurant. And we mainly programme just upcoming bands and stuff we find interesting, really.
Hi, I'm Louise. I work at Runway Artists. I'm a booking agent, and I think that's enough for now, but you can come and chat to me afterwards.
Thanks, everyone. My name's Jane. For those who don't know me, I'm a freelance programmer. I wanted to start by asking, and anybody can volunteer to pick this one up, what's the reality of your day-to-day programming, and what's the gap between that and what you really want to be doing? I'm going to throw this to Harkirit, because actually you brought this up when we were discussing our panel yesterday.
So I think, like, often realistic programming can almost feel like an oxymoron sometimes. You know, the stuff that I want to put on is... you know, you're dealing with a huge number of factors, you know, to put on like a 12-piece Afrobeat band, you know, musicians who really are at the top of their game with their, you know, performances and so on. It's a lot of money, and it's also very difficult to convince them to come to play a place like York. You know, often York gets passed over for towns like Leeds or Manchester. So you really have to work hard, and occasionally feel like you're almost kind of paying over the odds slightly, and you're going into something knowing really that it's going to be a real struggle to get the ticket fees to even kind of let you break even. So on the one hand, you know, we really want to have, you know, these kind of acts coming. So really what we're trying to do is balance those acts with things that are maybe, you know, speaking to a broader audience that we know are going to sell more tickets, and trying to create a balance within the program that way, but still trying to retain our identity at the same time, so that people are kind of very clear about who we are, what we're doing. And, you know, maybe people might not necessarily find you through the really cool, edgy, young, up-and-coming artists who've yet to release their first album, but they come to one of the other shows and then they start to trust in you and what it is you're doing as a promoter.
Yeah, I'm going to echo that fully. I think consistency is a massive thing in terms of sort of the day-to-day and sort of the gap between what I'd like to do all the time and what I do regularly. It's probably just more consistency, and that, like, for saying to Harkirit, like Thursday this week I've got El Cat playing, who are this amazing sort of Yemeni folk-inspired prog band. But it's a massive financial risk for us, and our overheads are massive, and I can't afford to take that kind of risk very often. And if there was a bit more stability, if bills weren't so big, if costs on like stock value on the bar keeps shooting up as well, if these things were more manageable and more sustainable and more stable, you're able to take those risks more, and you're able to sort of put a bit more money into promotion, whereas at the moment we are just literally just scraping by, and it's like our business model is predicated on everybody going above and beyond, really. And I think from speaking to people here, I think most people are in that same boat, and it's just reducing that as much as possible, because you know it's whether or not it's fair to ask yourself to work all the hours is one thing, but it's not fair to ask everybody to do that, and trying to redress that balance, I think, is massive.
I was going to say, I was just chatting to Milo just now about a couple of gigs that I tried to bring to Blackpool, and I thought it was quite interesting to chat about, because so two artists, one called Sound of the Sirens, had played a folk festival nearby, so I was like, surely they could go and play the venue at Blackpool. But no, just wasn't going to relate. And similar, I think, with one of my bands, Alien Chicks, more punk. They played Rebellion in Blackpool. And yeah, it's like, even if the agent wants to bring the artist to the venue, it's like, is it actually going to sell tickets? And like you were saying, like, you can't always afford to take risks. So it's like, it's tough for sure. Like, we want to bring exciting acts to all these different places, but can we actually make it happen?
I was just minded, actually, I was talking to, there was a young promoter, I should have said I also manage a band of 20-year-olds and just putting them out. I would echo what you were saying about getting venues to take the risk on a band that you've got no guarantee at this stage that they're going to sell tickets. And I met a young promoter. He booked my band for a one-day music festival, and at the end he put this big long post about how hard he'd worked on it and how he made £26 profit. And my response was, well done. You didn't lose anything, do you know what I mean? And actually, yeah, the sheer economics of, you know, I think even myself with working on the festival with a budget that is probably better than most, you know, the decisions that I'm having to make about can I really book that 12-piece band, and are they going to bring enough people to justify having that made that booking? And it's a constant balancing act. And then, say, speaking as a manager, trying to persuade venues and bookers that, you know, it's worth taking a punt on this band that they've never heard of. And it doesn't matter how good they are, if they're not going to sell tickets, then no one's going to benefit.
Milo, what's the balance between the programme that you put on that you want to be doing and the stuff that you need to do to sell the tickets and get people through the door?
I mean, it's quite hard, really, isn't it? So our personality as a venue is, we've tried to model it on, the acts you see at Bootleg will be a lot bigger the year after. And sort of 7 years in of doing it, I feel like we've sort of proven it in a way. But there's so much new acts I like our Alien Chicks gig, it was on 3 tickets. Like, it's just so hard. So we sort of counterbalance it with, for years we were against tribute acts. Like, myself and Skelly, the venue owner, were just like, we're not doing it. Like, it's just not our thing. Like, we're not doing it. But we've sort of come round to accept there's sometimes a necessary sort of evil. I don't know if it was...
I think
as soon as I said that.
I think covers bands are, it's a topic for discussion, but they are still musicians being paid on stage, right?
No, so I was about to get on to what... So if we put on a cover band one night, it means I can then take the chance on 3 more upcoming bands, because there's a bit of the pressure off. If you have a really good, say, an Oasis tribute, a great bar take, the pressure's off me a bit more the night after when there's a band on the first tour, and it might have only done 30 tickets. And that's how we sort of get away with it. We do quite a lot of club nights as well. So you might have a gig on beforehand that maybe does 50 tickets. And that's like, that's good. And then you follow it up with a club after, and it just balances out. But, I mean, it's not. I love the band side of it, but there's certain things you have to do to make it work.
And are you also seeing a decrease on the secondary spend at the moment? Is that... I'm seeing some nods. So... I mean, the stats that, we looked at this morning, in 1994, the average tour was 21 shows. In 2024, it's 10 shows. How... We'll move on to where we find the solutions for this, and obviously that's open to the room as well, because I'm sure there's some thoughts out there. How do we solve this problem? How do we solve this problem of people only going and doing 2 dates to 8 dates?
That's a big question. I think one of the things I'm really keen to talk about, and again, maybe it's a tenuous thing, but it's just the community aspect of things. I think we're really lucky in Swansea in that we have a nice network of local venues where everybody works together. And nobody's trying to step on each other's toes, because in a lot of places, like from what Milo was saying, it's kind of, there's not a lot of places trying to do what you're doing. So like where we are in Swansea, there's the Bunkhouse, I know Jordan's here somewhere, and like great success story. They're obviously just been taken on by music venue properties. But what we do doesn't really clash with what they do. And Hangar 18 is another venue in town, and they program heavier stuff and sort of older rock tribute acts and that kind of thing. Again, it doesn't clash with what I do. And I think whether it's speaking to local venues, local promoters, like groups, organizations, any way you can just tilt the odds in your favor a little bit and make it more feasible so that people haven't got to choose between 2 rock nights on a Friday night. One of them be rock, one of them be funk, one of them be jazz, whatever. Like trying to break that down. There's no point competing with people on your doorstep if you can avoid it. I know that's not possible everywhere. In some situations, you're going to have 2 rock pubs competing with each other. But I think, we've got a working group in Swansea between all of the venues I mentioned at Swansea Arena as well, who've been massively helpful. They put on a gig earlier this year, which raised £10,000, which Music Venues Trust was involved with. And the upshot of that was all of the venues in the SA postcode got £2,000 to spend on equipment. And that is more money. I've been 2.5 years at Elysium. That is so much more money than I've had to spend on anything in 2.5 years. And that's just come about through just talking to people and goodwill and just networking in your local community and finding ways to to work around these things. And the more people you speak to, I think the more perspectives you get. And I think that sort of helps to start tilt the odds in your favor a little bit then.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think for me as well is, particularly when I've found a band who I'm trying to maybe get up north, finding the promoter in Leeds who I want to work with, who is programming the similar stuff to me. And then, similarly, then further afield, reaching out to Future Yard and Birkenhead, where, so we've kind of almost got a nice little belt going across a strip of the north in the country. And really just having upfront conversations. I want to book this band. This is probably how much I think they want. Are you interested as well? This is the kind of date period I want to try and make it happen for, because I know that unless there is a tight run of 3-4 dates, that none of the gigs are going to happen. Or I might be able to get one gig to happen, my one, but the fee's going to be twice as much. So I think having really upfront conversations about building those relationships, if you see another venue in another town that consistently has a lot of the same, bookings that you're appearing on the same tour posters a lot. Have that conversation with them. Try and find them. They'll probably be here today, right? And then also, I think in the past, or people still are, very cagey about fees when either from the agent end or from promoters to each other as well. When I think in the current climate, we need to be having like very upfront and honest conversations about this is what I think this band will gross. This is what I think they need. And this is the kind of, like rather than being quite, like I was having a conversation with an agent recently and they were being so cagey about where else in the north they might be playing. And I'm trying to have a discussion like, if I can link together 3 or 4 dates, then, this might be more feasible, but I need to know where else you're looking at. And I think trying to get away from this kind of cagey, almost suspicion of other actors and players in the scene around you, and trying to get to a more collegiate sense. So touring networks, essentially.
So we caught up yesterday, and that was one point that came up. And I was thinking about that just now, actually. And yeah, I think that, even if you are chatting to any agent, you could just be like, well, this is obviously the offer I'm putting together. Do you know that I also chat to this venue and that venue? Like, I can introduce you, or I don't know if you're already chatting to them, but like literally just like, don't be like, try and make it as simple and easy and that you're helping kind of. I think if it's with that mentality, then hopefully people would be less cagey. I guess the reason people might be cagey is they don't have the answer yet. You know what I mean? They haven't rooted it. They don't know. They haven't looked at the avails. There's so many different reasons why. So I just think if I was chatting to someone and they were like, actually, like, also, we might be able to do this place and this place. Like, we'll all have to check the avails, like, and, word it like that. I can't see why people wouldn't want to get on board with that. Like, it might make life simple. And perhaps it's like, actually, no, this time we can't do that. But, for next time, you're like, okay, great. Well, I know that there's that connection. Because we're always looking for, ways to put stuff together and, not necessarily shortcuts, but, things to make everyone's lives easier, to make the tours better, to make artists' lives easier. So, I mean, it sounds like a great idea, and I love it. And I think just say it in a way that it seems helpful so that people don't, get defensive or something, because, we all take our jobs very seriously, and sometimes that's how people respond to things.
I mean, I think that's such an important point, isn't it? We're all part of an ecosystem that's all trying to survive. And I do that, like the festival that I program, I quite often talk to other promoters, particularly if there's bands coming. I quite often get bands who have been booked for Glastonbury or WOMAD or other UK festivals touring internationally, and I'm able to offer them a risk-free London show on their way, and it's really, really helpful to be able to do that. But I quite often speak to like other promoters that I know around London, and it's usually not particularly problematic if somebody's playing over in Hackney or somewhere else to have a second show, a free show, that they don't really have to worry about tickets for. So those kind of collaborations have been really important. And actually, one of the things that inspired me to do my living room concerts was I used to follow quite a lot of folk Americana bands from the US. And because we're very close to Gatwick, we used to quite often offer a bed tonight ones who were flying in. And one of the ways that some of those artists tour around the States is by doing, because America's so huge, they tour around the States by doing house concerts on their way, and it helps pay to get from venue to venue, and sometimes they might only just get what's taken in a hat. And so it sort of started from there, and we started to put some bigger gigs on a friend's farm in a barn, and we had some really good artists play there. And now sometimes I get agents will reach out to me and say, have you got capacity to put on this band, because it would be really helpful. And there are lots of funny little projects like Front Room Songs and small little music for love projects that aren't actually taking money that can be quite helpful in routing artists and getting to know some of those little funny little outliers on the in the ecosystem who aren't worried about making money. They just want to put good music on in their local communities. I guess that may be a way of helping each other.
And what Katie's not sharing with you here is that when you go to a gig in her living room, she also cooks for you, which I'm all in for that. Actually, after we spoke yesterday, I got involved in conversation about another panel that I'm on next week, which is all about AI, and it's way above my head and all this stuff. But I don't think we can have this conversation without talking about the audience experience and how, we can see that ticket sales are declining. We know that people are, struggling with money at the moment, but seem to be able to find £1,000 to go and see certain artists. But, how do we... In what ways are you changing the way that you're presenting work, that the experience for the audience is different? And I'll throw that open to anybody here as well, if somebody has a beautiful answer to that. I mean, cooking for people is...
Well, I mean, we've been able to, run a little 30-capacity venue charging £25 a head. Most of the people who come to those living room gigs don't even know anything about the artist who's playing, but they pay £25 just for that experience of eating some home-cooked food, bringing their own bottle, and hanging out with some people. I wouldn't say it's a sustainable financial model, but the artists do very well out of it, and it's a really nice experience. And as I say, it sometimes helps artists who are trying to tour properly in venues like yours, many of you here have. So it's just perhaps another way of thinking about it. People want experiences. I think that's, and I don't know whether there's perhaps something there to think about is that how we package the live music experience. I don't know, there's two extremes of it, aren't there? There's people who are paying hundreds of pounds or a lot of money, and then at the other end of the spectrum is young people who simply don't have enough money to go to gigs. If they can afford the ticket, they can't afford a drink when they get there. So we kind of have to address both ends of that, because I think, especially when Steve Lamacq was talking this morning, it reminded me, we were going to gigs when we were 14 years old. We were sneaking into pubs and seeing live music, and I feel like there's actually a kind of much higher and bigger problem about what's out there for young people today that goes beyond just accessing live music. And the town I live in, you walk down there on a Friday night and it's literally dead. There's nothing. There's not even a youth club. And so I just think there's a much bigger narrative about young people and live music, and that goes way beyond that.
I think it's community spaces as well. There's so many pubs have closed, social clubs, working men's clubs. I think so. Being a community space, I think, is probably more and more of a thing. With music venues, it's probably more and more of a crossover. And going back to what you were saying, I think experiences, the place I work in, it's the bar where we put bands on. We haven't got a stage. Sometimes, depending on the band, I might keep that quiet until the contract's signed and then be, but it depends on the band. But we've got art all over the walls. There's things they can do and things they can't do, and play to your strengths. It's a funky venue. There's colours all over the walls. And most gig venues aren't like that, because if you've got a rock gig in and everything's kicking off, numerous times we've had punk gigs on, and I'll see, it's been getting a bit rowdy, and then the headliners, a band called the Shunkos who play locally, they were about to come on. I was like, I'm just going to take these paintings off the wall preemptively, just in case. But people love the space, and they love how DIY it is. And I spent half my life moving chairs and tables around, because the night will start, and you might have some kind of lo-fi singer-songwriter with a guitar. And at that point, it's a bit of a seated vibe. And if you can manage that throughout the night, and then by the time the headliners are on, just sort of keeping an eye on tables as they stand up, just steal their table and chairs when they're not looking. And then by the end of the night, it's a gig venue, and everything's going on. So I think managing your space and using what you've got to your advantage and not fighting it, and just looking at what you've got and thinking, what does this suit? What can I do with this? What feels natural? What feels nice?
Harkirit, how are you doing things differently in York these days?
I think, honestly, I wouldn't say we're doing things really differently, but I think we're kind of trying to roll with the punches a little bit, I'm trying to maintain a program that really is balanced and varied, and there's only really a couple of venues in York, and we're really the only venue of a certain size in York. So I think we feel like a duty to be trying to speak to a lot of different tastes and sensibilities and so on. So I think for us, it's on the one hand, we want to be able to be risky and bold and adventurous with our programming. On the other hand, we've also always felt a responsibility to have a very varied and balanced program. And in a way, I think that's kind of been like a saving grace as well, right? In a tougher time, if you're not too reliant on one strand of programming, then you're able to like weather things slightly better, I think. But it's still, nonetheless, takes a lot of real active work to keep the calendar full in the first place. The bookings don't really come to you. You have to really go out and get them. Yeah, and keep on like emailing even when you don't get the replies. Try again and so on. So yeah.
I've got a question, and it might be bold, and I might regret it. But what can I, as an agent or my agency, do to make your lives easier? Might regret this question, but I'm kind of curious, seeing as that's what we're trying to do, work as a community.
A standout one for me is...
I'm going to regret this.
No, I'm sure other promoters in the room will agree. It's the lack of... When you're promoting a show, we can't put forward like our own local support. So a lot of the time, it's like a tour support or maybe a new emerging act on the agency. And especially in places like Blackpool, you need local supports to just give you a safety cushion. Know of, say, 30, 40 people. And I find that really sort of frustrating on shows. Like, you'll get added an act from, say, Hereford, and I'm like, what is that adding to sales? This gig's going to be dead. We need, like, trust in local promoters more. That would be my answer.
I think that's completely fair, and I think, as I'm growing my artists, I just want the show to go as well as possible for everyone, so I'm definitely open to hearing on locals, and yeah, it's a conversation for sure, and I think that's it. We all just need to remember to try and have that conversation. We all get busy and stressed, and maybe sometimes don't always make the best decision, but let's always just try and take a second and remember we're all here for the same thing, I suppose. So thanks for that. I appreciate that.
I also have a question for you as the agent on the panel, which is, obviously we're seeing these decreasing number of dates on tours. We all understand that touring is more and more expensive. How can we work together to change that around? Because we are, I've been in a lot of smaller towns across the UK over the last few years for various reasons. And it is what you're saying, Katie. You're there on a Thursday night and you come out of your travelling and you're like, where is everybody? So how do we collectively work to bring some life back into those places? I think when we were talking yesterday, we talked a little bit about readjusting mindsets. We're all really, really busy and we've all grown up learning a way to work, but how do we ever take the time to stand still, take a step back and go, could we do it a different way?
Big question. I guess it's, like you said, the whole mindset thing, thinking about things differently. I guess depending on the tour, it's like, well, what does the artist want? What's realistic? You're right, it's just having a bit more of a think about it, thinking, could we go somewhere else instead of the main cities? Like, obviously, typically, for an album campaign, it might be that you may want to, or an EP, a release, you might want to go to the bigger cities. But, artists usually tour quite often, so it's just trying to get them out as much as possible. Independent Venues Week is a good way of shining a light on venues all over, so maybe it's more initiatives like that. Obviously, Music Venue Trust have done schemes in the past as well, and might have some more coming up. It's always like Revive Live, they always go to lots of Beese, DC. I don't want to use any of those terms, but we all know the terms. So I don't know, like you said, it's just thinking of ways to think slightly differently and trying to change that mindset. But I generally don't know how we would do that other than just trying to chat to each other. And anyone else got any other ideas?
I think in terms of touring bands coming in especially, I think Swansea isn't a very rich town. There's not a lot of money going around. And I've definitely noticed that when I've tried to bring bands in from outside of town and say £15 a ticket, it's a lot harder to convince people to come out. That's a lot of money, and that might be the one night out of the month. And how that sort of stacks up against big arena tours where it's God knows how much a ticket is again another question. But I think with touring acts coming through, again, pairing them with local bands for a start, but I think like the entry-level ticket price, I think if it's the first time a band is playing a city, I think if you can get that down below a tenner, it's massive, because people are getting changed from a tenner. Like psychologically, I think that's massive, whereas if it's 15 plus fees, in my head, that's £20. And I've got to make a decision then whether, I don't get a lot of time off. Like, can I go to that? I don't know. But if it's less than a tenner, I think, especially if it's a touring band who hasn't got a huge profile yet. And again, the cyclical thing of getting a local band on the bill then, hopefully they'll have played in local venues. They've built up a bit of a following. You can get them on the bill. That'll bring the crowd. Okay, you might not make a lot of money the first time, but for the next time, it feels like you're so much better set up then, perhaps.
As well, like sometimes kind of similarly on that as well is I think days of the week can matter massively as well. Like you might have a conversation where you're saying, okay, I get that your other dates are £17.50 a ticket, but you're giving me a Monday and I'm really going to struggle. It's hard enough doing something on a Monday as it is when you're adding £17.50 plus booking fees. And yet, flip side of that was I was having a conversation with an agent recently, and somehow, even though we hadn't just, I was, gave an offer that wasn't really dependent on a certain date or day. I was like, look, this is what I think this is worth. And they said, oh no, we need $4,000. Maybe if it was a Thursday, we could do 3.5. And I was like, fucking give me a Monday. Give me what I need to make this happen. Like, are you really saying you're actually just going to have huge chunks in your of days off in your touring schedule? Because that's not really good for anyone. So, I think sometimes we can have we could be having a bit more flexibility around, what day it is that you're actually after. And can I help you have you got a hole that I can help fill in your touring schedule where maybe you weren't thinking of York or wherever you're based before? Can we help you out in that way? So at least you're not having a day where you're earning nothing,
I think another thing we discussed yesterday, and I think this came from you, was in your Northern Cartel world, just pointing out how expensive hotel rooms can be in certain cities, and actually, couldn't you put this run together where you actually had some beautiful farmyard Airbnb in the middle of it all? Or it's the residential stuff, isn't it? Venues that actually have any sort of residential stuff, that's taking a chunk out of your budget that can go to help it. But let's try and focus on some solutions. I wondered if any of you wanted to talk about any experiences you'd had around funding, additional funding, not just straight out of the box office, or any sponsorship deals, or whether you see that as being part of your future thinking. I think another thing about the 10 years of MVT that I really think is some real progress is that government now seems to be listening to us when we're talking about this crisis, and that it just seems an extraordinary thing to me. So because it is now being discussed at government level in a more serious way, is it government funding? Is it sponsorship deals? Where do you see a little light, if there is a little light anywhere?
I mean, the funding's interesting because until this summer, I've been the promoter at Bootleg for 7 years. I've always heard of Arts Council funding, things like that, but it's sort of like the Wizard of Oz, like the man behind the curtain, like, how do you get this money? And I need to be careful what I say. It seems to be the same people that get the same funding. And it was only recently I had a chat with Jay, the Arts Council put an event on in Blackpool that was specifically to invite people down and say, this is what's on offer. And I was surprised at sort of how much there is. But then I suppose the flip side of it is, it's a lot of people that work in venues will have a second job, or just running the venue is like 2 jobs. Where do you find the time to do these forms with no guarantee that anything could come from it? I suppose in Blackpool for us, I've never seen anyone, cause, I mean, it's hard, there's no other venue really, but someone else that's done it, and then you're like, oh, this is actually sort of achievable and accessible. So yeah, the funding's there. I think a lot of people in the room might just think, how'd you get it?
I think I'd echo what Milo said, in that my experience is I've come into an arts organisation and their bread and butter, for want of a better word, is doing funding applications, and I completely echo what you say about the same people getting the funding all the time, and it's an art unto itself, filling in these applications. I can't get any funding from the Arts Council of Wales because Elysium is already funded on the arts side of things. I can't get any funding for the music, which is a bit stimmying sometimes, but it's fair enough. We already get money as a company. I'm not going to kick off about that. But going back to what I said earlier, I think collective bargaining power, community, like the MVT is a brilliant example of what happens when people come together and speak as one. And I think for, just thinking off the top of my head now in terms of accommodation, if sort of MVT or a list of hundreds of venues went to, let's say, Premier Inn and said, we've got a group here of 600 venues who all need accommodation for artists on average 10, 15, 20 nights a year. Have we had that conversation? If not, right, Premier Inn don't want it, go to the next one. And just things like that. And the more voices you have behind those arguments, the stronger it becomes. So I think just mobilise locally, just speak to venues, get involved with MBT, speak any community network you can build. By having these conversations, you find out what the common ground is, you find out where the gaps are, and somebody will have a bit of experience, or if they don't, they'll know somebody. And it is, going back to the money thing, people don't want to talk about that, and I think it's that, at the moment, it's probably a desperation mindset where if somebody gets a band that they think should cost them 1,500 quid and they get them for 500 quid, they probably don't want to give that away, because on next time they come in, maybe I can get that gig again, and maybe I won't have to pay them 1,500 quid again because they had a great time. But it's having these open conversations with people. I think that's the start of that, and I think there's benefit to be had there.
So I got the Supporting Grassroots Live Music funding to help fund my kind of program of gigs over the past year, and I think it's twofold. One is that whilst obviously it's really helpful because it's kind of enables you to take a lot more risks, I think once that comes to an end, you're kind of thinking, well, what's my next step from here? Am I just going to go for this funding again? And if I don't get it, what kind of position does that leave me in? What position does it leave the audience in? And also then at the same time, what am I kind of almost like locking myself into paying this certain agent or these certain artists quite a high rate because I just said yes, right? And then also when you're planning the thing, I almost think that the kind of form isn't necessarily structured in a way that a lot of grassroots promoters work, where, once you start a conversation with an agent, often we're talking about fairly small windows in which they're booking these tours, and then you've got a 12-week turnaround for the funding to come back. And you're then in a kind of catch-22 of like, well, I want to book this, but I'm not going to know, so am I just going to commit to this? Or maybe I'm going to kind of have a think about putting this artist on this application, but I'm not actually going to fully have that conversation yet because I don't want to lock myself into something. And so it doesn't really kind of work in the way that a lot of this ecosystem works. So I think that really needs looking at. And that's for the Arts Council really to look at. Yeah.
I was going to say a couple of things I've seen, not specifically I've seen do, but one of the pros I know has like a season ticket for events at the venue, which I think is quite a nice idea as people's way of supporting, and they either get reduced or free entry to the events. Maybe another way of looking at people directly appealing to people for supporting venue. And one of the other things, if you've got a venue, you've got a space, and I don't know if this is applicable to venues, but it's one of the things I do at the festival is, I guess I'm able to eke my budget out and spend the money that I want to on some of the bigger acts and bands because I basically make that space available sometimes to other organisations I collaborate. So, for example, the Argentinian embassy always does London Goes Tango there, and they're just happy to have the space for free and the use of all our facilities. And they bring their own crowd, they promote the event, it's kind of part of the festival, but they're doing it all. And I don't have to pay a penny out of my budget for that, which means that I've got some more money to spend another day on another act. So maybe starting to think about our spaces as usual, places we can offer to other people that do have money that maybe could benefit from them.
I was wondering whether anybody in the room had any questions around this. I think we might have a mic, but I'm not. There is a mic, but no hands.
Couple of things which I'm not saying they're easy to do, because they're not, but one was we introduced a paid membership scheme 12 months ago, which gives people like a regular discount on gig tickets and bar tickets, and that we've done just over 250 members in a year at £25, and then we had £2 our own levy to help young artists in the area with their gig fees outside the area. But the bigger one, and this was hard, but I don't think it's. I would encourage you to try and do it, and that is in terms of the levy. We've all talked about the levy and the work that MV2 are doing and trying to do, which is great. We've got one big outside venue in Halifax called the Peace Hall, and probably about a year and a half ago, I kind of knew of the levy, and it just thought, why can't they do it for the shows that they sell? So I kind of spent quite a bit of time building up support with the council, our local MP, and approached them initially. I'll be honest, I was told afterwards the chief exec thought I was an idiot for trying, but it did kind of progress, and it gradually moved up the chain, if you like. Mark got involved, and ultimately it went to Live Nation. They're the ultimate promoters, and they brought in an optional levy this year. So it was kind of very much a local initiative to something national, and kind of just try to took on ourselves to do it. And we don't know the final figure for the first year, but there's the 5 venues that it's all going to in the borough that I'm from, like the Trades and Golden Lion, you may have heard of. We're all going to get at least 6,500 each from that compulsory levy. We think it would be more, but we just haven't got the final figure. And then what's further happened to that since is that the council we're from have got one municipal theatre which is regularly programming, and they're starting conversations the next month about being a compulsory levy in to help those venues, in the 5 venues in the area. So I'm not saying that's easy, but we kind of just, if you can build up the local people behind it, the council behind it, and you've got the venues that are putting stuff on, it's just, well, what you got to lose by giving it a go.
Do you have a sense of what percentage is opting in?
No, I don't. I mean, the ultimate aim is for the levy to be compulsory. We know that, and Mark knows that. I would imagine the ticket sales were way in excess of 10 million. I think that's quite easily achieved, what they'll achieve. So it's a tiny, tiny amount, but yeah, 6,000 plus per venue. We're all, we're all pleased. We're all going to update our equipment, etc., with it. But yeah.
Has anyone else got a question for us?
I just wanted to say that I have a few spaces in my Independent Venues Week tours, if anyone wants to come and chat to me afterwards, and that we can get some more bookings and make everyone happy. So I just want to do a little plug for that before questions continued. So there you go.
I'm going to round us up then, I think. Does anybody want to... Okay, in the previous panel, there was talk of a magic wand. If you had a magic wand or a superpower in order to solve these challenging times, what would that be?
I think for me, if every music venue in the country was owned by music venue properties, we're lucky we got a sympathetic landlord, but it's an old building, money isn't infinite, there's huge problems in various areas of the building, and they're nice landlords at the moment, so we don't want to rock the boat too much. But at some point I'm going to have to. Whether or not they're going to do those repairs, I don't know. What happens then, I don't know. So in terms of like long-term security, I think as many venues as possible moving into like private ownership as opposed to being leased, I think that would make a massive difference.
I mean, if it's really magic, just end capitalism.
Speaking from the sort of artist manager side, just a kind of more integrated approach to like transport policy, and just like I band I managed got invited to play in Norwich. They're from Exeter, and it was like it was going to cost £600 even with young person's rail cards just to get them to Norwich by train. And I was like, how insane is that? And how does any young band get out on the road and go to venues and be able to sustain themselves with the sorts of fees that they're able to get? So I think like there are sort of multiple layers to the problem, and reducing the costs to the artists as well would make a massive difference. So yeah, a government that gets it.
I've got a feeling that Mark's got an idea that might help with that.
I think the one that pops into my mind is a few years ago, our landlord gave us an apartment above the venue, which we thought brilliant, like artist accommodation. And then initially, he'd be sending out emails, and agents were just loving it. They were like, "What do you mean there's free accommodation for acts? This is amazing." But sort of as the pinch has gone on, it's turned into an Airbnb. And it's like, I'd love to be emailing agents saying, we can put your acts up for free. I'm sure that would go a massive way in a place like Blackpool. Like if I was saying, I'll put your acts up. Yeah. But it's just the funding, isn't it? Like that's the boring answer of it all. That
was going to be my answer. I don't know, just obviously Live and MVT are doing so much to make everything more known to the government and more known to the public. And, just kind of my magic wand would be making everything that they want to happen. So, if we had a pipeline fund that developed artists so that venues were paid fairly, artists were paid fairly, and everything was just, gigging didn't have to be such a stress or such a wait on tickets when bands are starting out, because there is this supporting network, then, I just think that would make everyone's lives so much easier. So that's my magic wand. It's just lots of money, please.
Yeah. Can I just, one other thing, it's just also, I was just, again, thinking about what Steve Lamarck said this morning and about how exciting going to gigs was when I was younger. And it does seem to me that there's a job to re-inspire young people, just re-inspire people just generally about live music. I got given a ticket to see Elton John at the O2 the other year, and I'm not really an Elton John fan, if I was being really honest, but you're not going to turn down a free ticket to see a legend like that. But I went, and I was up in the stalls about what felt like about 5 miles from the stage. Elton John was this little tiny dot, and I just thought, it seems extraordinary to me that people are paying hundreds and hundreds of pounds for something that you don't actually really feel part of in any way. He's just a dot on the stage that I can barely see, and I don't feel like the audience around me is feeling this either. They're just ticking a box that says, we went to see Elton John at the O2, and I'm sure that's what's happening with lots of other big-name tours. It's ticking a box. So it seems to me there's a big job to do around, say, re-inspiring people around live music and what it means. And, don't wait until 20 years later to see Oasis for £300 a ticket. Go and see them at your local venue right now.
I think my magic wand's quite achievable, actually. It would be that people talk to each other, and I know we do in this community, and I know we do in this bit of the sector, but my tiny anecdote is many years ago when I was an agent's assistant, I used to phone up Mark at the Tunbridge Wells Forum to see if he had a date for, there was a band we looked after called Cecil. I'm sure nobody remembers Cecil. And we would be on the phone for about 20 minutes, and we'd have a bit of a chit-chat, and I'd ask him about his new girlfriend, Bev, and we'd do that bit. And then at the end of the 20 minutes, we would have agreed a date, and we would have agreed a get-in time and a ticket price and what time the band were going to arrive and all of that. And at the end of that phone conversation, I would fax him a contract. So that sort of dates it for you. My point being that, you know, email is just the bane of our lives, isn't it? Any show we book now, it's 200 emails, drip feeding a tiny bit of information. Just pick up the phone to each other.
Bring back fax machines.
Bring back fax machines. Look, Jay didn't even have to wave his paddle at me.
Oh, wow.
Has anybody got any other questions before we finish up?
I think, going on what you just said, Jane, it'd be good if more venues just spoke to each other. Like, we have a good relationship with Matt at the Ferret. I can see him on the back row over there. And the guys at the parish, and we sort of compare and contrast fees, or how is this done for you, etc., etc. And I don't know why we aren't doing that with more. It's just making these connections with these venues that maybe you only speak to on email or on Instagram DM or whatever. But yeah, I think just more people talking to each other would just, it's just so obvious.
I think in terms of like an ecosystem as well. So I mentioned earlier, we worked with the Arena and we work with all the other local venues in the city. We had Swansea Fringe on the weekend just gone. It was massive success, brilliant. Everywhere was really busy. But having that kind of ecosystem where, so like young bands may have played on every Friday night gig with us is free entry. So we get local bands in, 4 local bands, pay them 250 quid between the bands, however makes most sense, and just hope I make that much money on the bar. But bands can go from, we run like a young musicians network. Jordan from the Bunkhouse has just finished running a young promoters course. People who are coming up and starting in music can do one of these courses, attend some events, attend a free entry gig, attend a low-cost event. Then they see that band or their band supporting a touring band. And then, amazingly, in Swansea, these bands had the opportunity to play at an arena. So, it was this amazing showcase of local talent. And I think if more of that stuff could happen nationwide, I think it would benefit everybody, because it becomes more tangible and more achievable then. If you're starting out in music and your mate started out a year ahead of you, and within a year they're playing on an arena stage in front of hundreds and hundreds of people, that feeling of like you can reach out and you can touch it, it's there, it's doable, it's achievable. I think that's potentially missing in a lot of places at the moment, and people are struggling to join the dots between a lot of different things. And having that network and that ecosystem which all feeds into itself, the bands train together, play together, and benefits everybody then.
And I think just kind of building on that and building on what you just said, just kind of going back to the idea of creating the networks that you want to see to make something happen, and whether it's either just kind of a regional network or whether it's more kind of national but perhaps genre-based. Like if you're trying to do something different with your programming, trying to like identify who else is out there who's also kind of thinking in the same vein as you. And I think that once you've done it once or twice or 3 times, you know, I'm starting to have acts really coming to me now to say, you know, can you help us either like, we're trying to get Arts Council funding for our tour, can you help us, you know, provide some dates to put in the application? Or equally, you know, a band coming to you and saying, okay, well, you know, we've got this, you've expressed an interest in us, like, can you help us try and access some other gigs, or do you know who else we can speak to? And I think it's really kind of started to build a reputation for us, even though numbers-wise, ticket-wise, we're not doing more tickets than some of the bigger cities. It's because we're more willing to have like a kind of collegiate approach to working. Yeah.
I was just going to say, like, if a venue is treating an artist well and they're making a nice experience and they've got a scene, then like we're going to find out about that, and that is going to be something that agents and managers and artists will think about when they're going to a venue. So, you know, investing in the human side of things as well is so important.
Thank you. I've got a hand. Amazing.
Hello. Can you hear me? I'll just speak really loud. Project. One of the things that I was going to say, I'm at Old Abbey Tap House in Manchester, and one of the things I think can be really helpful is when your venue links in with like local festivals, because a lot of the time the people and the freelancers and that who are working on the site, they're actually really trying to engage with local people, and sometimes we just don't think to talk to each other. So something I like to do is approach and say, like, would you like to have, when you launch your tickets, would you like to do a launch party here? And then it can introduce the bands in your network to a festival, and then some of the freelancers at that festival probably work on another one. And it kind of gets everybody playing outside of their city, or even if the festival's like right near the city, just to a new audience and to new people, and get that experience then playing on a stage. How do I advance for a festival? And like, so I find like reaching out to the other, people producing live music really benefits both people as well.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And I'd also, and I'm sure everybody's doing this, is talking to the organisations who are kind of involved in talent development. And Scott, you just touched on it there, where we're not just talking about artists, we're talking about the promoters of the future, the managers of the future, because, historically those jobs didn't necessarily come with any sort of formal training. You just sort of happened into them, didn't you? So I think, that seems to have come through quite strongly in this conversation today around network and community and making all those bonds and links that you can. Thank you for being... there's another hand.
Hello. Just a couple of thoughts that I've been pondering on as you've been talking. I run a little venue down in Devon. Two things that we do. One is we always have 3 prices for every gig: a high, medium, low. Audience chooses the price. There's no such thing as a full price concession, and you can have the high price maybe slightly over the odds, middle price, a lower price. Typically we do things like 15, 10 and 7. It works really well. It seems to be unusual. So I'm just throwing that out there. You mentioned a wish of being able to have free accommodation. We ask our audience if they'll put visiting musicians up, and usually they will. Excuse me. So we, in a way, I've created a rod for my own back by offering it, because I then have to organise it and ask people, and often it's quite at the last minute. But we usually find beds for people either at a very low or 0 cost.
I think that's an excellent idea, and I love the Devon dynamic pricing model.
Yeah, I'm really interested. It's not dynamic, it just is what it is, yeah. So I'm quite interested in, as an agent, from an agent perspective, how often, I feel like you're getting grilled here, I feel that. Like, how often do you see like an offer sheet, particularly when there's a door split at the end of it? How would you kind of react, or how often might you see something where there's kind of discounted level of tickets? Do you see that often?
I'm not sure I know exactly what you mean. So
for example, if we're giving an offer sheet and there's a guarantee on, and there's a door split at the end of it, and obviously you as the agent, you're hoping that it will reach into that door split, but it's probably quite difficult to gauge like what level of, is it going to do this many tickets at this tier, that many tickets at that tier? Like, what would you, if someone was to say to you, oh, well, I want to try this tiered ticketing system for this gig, what would you like to see from them? Do you know what I mean?
So I think it just depends on the artist, what their ticket worth is, what you're expecting. Like, we all typically know at what level our artists are at. So for the more emerging stuff, I feel like I would welcome ideas like that, because I want people in the room. I want to grow the audience. Honestly, as it gets higher up and an artist is making more money and they expect more money, and, it becomes more of a conversation for sure, because it is going to affect the bottom line, and to say anything other than that would be a lie. So, and I have had those conversations, and I think it's just, again, like, don't just add it in, like, in an offer sheet. Like, if that is a conversation, then you'd be like, well, actually, we're thinking about doing a tiered ticket system, or we do a tiered ticket system, so this is how it will look. And, and then it's just making sure everyone's aware, and then it's just having that conversation with the artist and the manager, and if everyone's happy, then it's all good. Just don't randomly throw it in last minute without telling anyone, because then obviously people would be like, what?
I think we might have instigated an entirely new session on ticketing, which we'll need another hour for, and Jay really is waving his paddle at me now, so We have time up. I'd like to say a massive thank you to all my new pals on the panel.